Hello and welcome to our Tween and Teen Art Camp Kit demo with the Public Library of Brookline. My name is Kayla and I'm a Youth Services Librarian at the Brookline Village Library. I'm here today to show you how to make crayon candles. Let's get started. Is this your first Public Library of Brookline to-go program? Here's how it works. Each month, the library is offering new take-home program kits, complete with everything you need to follow along and video or written instructions created by one of your local librarians. The best part? Absolutely no due dates. You can keep everything included in your kit. Visit brklib.com/to-go for a full list of our current kit offerings. You can feel free to stop by any library location to pick up your kit. No need to reserve in advance. Now, let's get crafting. Starting off, we're going to look at our supplies. So we have a couple of Dixie cups that you're going to be melting the wax in. We've got our different crayon colors that you can choose from when you're making your striped candle. You can choose from any of those colors, as many or as few as you like. We've also got this bag of wax chips, a wick, and this glass container. And finally, we also have a couple of popsicle sticks for you to stir the hot wax with. So the first step is going to be melting the wax. So to start off, you're going to take one of your Dixie cups, and you're going to get your bag of wax chips. And for this first layer, this is just going to be to stick the wick to the bottom of the glass container. So you're not going to need too much. Maybe fill up about 1/5 of the plastic cup with wax chips. And you don't need to add any color yet because it's not going to really show up. But yeah, you can see I filled it up about 1/5 of the way. So then you're going to take this and you're going to pop it in the microwave for about 90 seconds. It might need less than that, so make sure to keep an eye on it. But once that is melted, you're going to put your wick in the center of the glass container, and then you're going to make sure that it's all straight so that you can pour in the hot wax so that it'll stick to the bottom. This way it won't be moving around when you add the other layers. So just pour it in carefully, and it's okay if the wick moves a little bit. Once it contacts the hot wax, you'll be able to sort of prop it up using some of the popsicle sticks if you feel like you need to, but it's okay if it sort of slants to the side at first. So then once you've given that a chance to dry, it's not going to need too long. I'd say maybe 10 minutes. Once it's got that sort of opaqueness to it, you're ready to move on to your next layer of wax, which you're going to do in step 2, melting the crayons. So to start off, you're going to choose which colors you want to use. Because it's Pride Month, I decided to get the colors of the Buy Pride flag. So I wound up using this sort of sharp-ended thumbtack to sort of get the paper off, because I found it really hard to pry off with just my fingernails, as you can see with me struggling and failing to do that. You can use scissors for this, or an X-Acto knife, or maybe even a butter knife if you really gave it a shot. Obviously, it was not the easiest thing to do, so it's okay if you sort of struggle to peel the paper off, but you want to make sure it's all off. I found it a little easier to use a tool because then it was easier to sort of peel it back and away from the crayon. Just like that. So, as you can see, the bottom of this is fully dried now. So no need to wait for that any longer now that it's turned completely white. So now we're going to melt our first layer of wax. You're going to fill it up about 1/3 of the way. You can always add a couple more chips later if it feels like you need a little bit more. So Once you finish filling that up with the white wax, yeah, so about 1/3 of the way, and then I broke up the crayon to put inside, and I didn't wind up using the full crayon because I didn't want the blue to be super dark. You can sort of decide how dark you want the color to be and add the corresponding amount of crayon. So more crayon for darker colors, less crayon for lighter colors, since you're mixing it with white. So there it is with the broken crayon inside, ready to be popped in the microwave for 90 seconds. When you take it out of the microwave, be careful because the wax is going to be hot. But once it's out, you can take one of the popsicle sticks and just give it a little stir. Don't do it too vigorously or the wax will splash up onto your hand. I wound up adding a couple more wax chips because I decided I wanted my layer to be a little bit thicker, and then I just popped it in the microwave again after giving it a little stir here. Sometimes the wax is hot enough to just melt the chips on its own, but it's nice to sort of give it a little more time in the microwave just to make sure that it's all fully melted together. So now we're going to start working on our layers. So I went with blue for my first layer because, like I said, I'm making a little pride flag candle. So I just poured it in so it didn't get onto the actual wick where this layer wasn't going to touch, and then I just poured in as much wax as I wanted. It's going to dry at about the same level that you pour it in at, so you can adjust accordingly to make sure that it lines up with where you want the color to stop. There it is, liquid. And then again, if the wick starts to sort of lean one way or another, you can use a popsicle stick to make sure that it's up straight. So then you're going to wait 20 to 30 minutes to make sure that the wax has solidified. So now that my wax is solid, I decided to add my next layer of color, which is purple. So I did the same thing as before. I got my wax chips and I broke my crayon so that it was ready to melt in the microwave for 90 seconds. So once that was all nice and melted, after 90 seconds, I gave it another good stir. And then I poured in my second layer. I decided to do it straight up and down, but you can pour it at an angle if you want and sort of hold the glass container sideways if you want to add a sort of triangular effect to it, but it's whatever you want it to be. So again, my wick sort of started to slant, so I held it up with a popsicle stick. Extra straight. And then you're gonna let that sit for another 20 to 30 minutes. So you can see it does sort of leach the color up from the lower layers. That's not a huge deal, especially with the darker colors, so don't worry about it too much. So for this one, I was trying to go for pink, which it wound up being harder than I thought it was going to be. I started with this tiny little nub of red in the white wax because I thought that the red would be a little bit too, I guess, strong when mixed with it. Ultimately, I should have added that nub of crayon in too, because even though it turned out this sort of red color, when it ultimately dried, it was not as pink as I wanted it to be. So even if you're going for a lighter color, I would still add more than I did. And it's okay if it looks a little bit darker when it's actually in its melted wax form, because it's going to dry lighter. Because remember, you're mixing the color with white. So even if it looks pretty red there, it's not going to dry that color. And so I actually wound up adding a little bit more wax here just to make sure that I got to the top of the container. And just pour that in right on top. Ultimately, you'll see that my sort of end result had kind of a bumpy quality to it. It's because as it started to dry, I noticed that it was coming out too white, and so I melted down a little more of the red crayon, and I added it so that it would have more of a pinkish tone. It ultimately came out a little bit lilac, as you'll see a little bit later in the video, which is totally fine. But yeah, So here's the finished result. You can see it's a little lumpy because I added in the color in the top layer after it had already dried a little bit, but once you actually light it, it's not going to be a problem. Congrats on your new candle! Thank you so much for making art with us today. We would love to see what you made with your kit, so feel free to share your project with us on social media using the hashtag BRKLIB2Go. The Tween and Teen Kit program is generously sponsored by the Friends of the Brookline Public Library and the Brookline Library Foundation. Thanks for crafting with us today.